Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the number one home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones, and we have an interesting show for you. It's going to be the free Iron Man show, so stay tuned. We're going to be talking all about Andrew Cogliano in this show and your thoughts and impressions and everything as far as his suspension, as well as the last couple games the Ducks played. We're going to talk about the All-Star selections, whether or not the Ducks were winners and losers in that, and, of course, get into all your fan questions. So the Ducks were on a break. We had our podcast during then, Eddie, and the Ducks came out of that break, and so did the Kings. And they met up on Saturday night, and the Ducks ended up winning this one, Eddie. The Ducks finally beat the Kings. They had played them twice before, gone into overtime or a shootout and lost, and they got off to a great start. Andre Kasha scored. Kessler scored as well early in the game. They built a 2-0 lead and a 3-0 lead with Kasha again in the third. The Kings did try to rally, but the Ducks held on. Perry with the empty net goal at the end there, and the Ducks ended up winning this one, Eddie, by a final score of 4-2. What'd you think?
Well, I mean, they played good for about 55 minutes, and then from there on, they almost blew it, or for about 50 minutes, up until about halfway through the third period, and then the Kings were able to get two quick goals, and it got a little bit shaky from there. Luckily, Perry was able to get a good turnaround slap shot into the empty net to seal the deal, but it was a little bit sketchy there at the end. I mean, it's obviously a big win with the Ducks looking to gain ground, and now LA's actually slipped a bit with the Flames winning 7 games in a row. The Flames have moved up into that second spot in the Pacific, and San Jose started in a roll too. So this was a bigger game than we anticipated, with the Ducks now looking to close ground on LA. So I think it was a big game. Obviously, Andre Kasha had a great game. We'll talk about that a little bit later and how he's played. But, yeah, I mean, it looked like it was going to be one of those games again where the Ducks were up at a 2 or 3 goal lead, and then they blow it. But they got a little bit lucky in this one to come out with it and get the 2 points in regulation.
Yeah, and, how about the start to this game? We knew Jared Boll was called up. It was kind of ironic because you and I and some of the other people on the staff, we talked about that, and I had mentioned, well, I think Boll and McDermott are going to go at it, and they're the first ones that do go at it in this game at the 2:29 mark. A couple seconds later, it's Bieksa and Androv going at it again. You remember Bieksa did the Superman punch and knocked him out, so they went at it one more time. And then right after that, Richie and Clifford went at it. So you had 3 fights off 3 face-offs in a total of 4 seconds, Eddie, to start this game. One of the wildest starts I've seen to a Kings-Ducks game.
Yeah, I honestly don't think I've ever seen that happen. I mean, we've seen 3 fights in a brawl where guys have gotten in fights, and we've seen that. But I don't think I've ever seen 3 separate fights in a span of 4 seconds. It was just ridiculous. I mean, I was kind of half watching the game, just getting ready after the first fight, and sitting down, and I thought it just kept replaying on repeat because, I was streaming the game, so I thought I'd hit back and that it was the same fight, and I noticed it was a different one. It was Bieksa, and then the face-off was about to go again, and I kind of glanced over, and I was like, are they replaying it? And no, it was Richie fighting Clifford for the third fight. But, yeah, I mean, it was crazy. And you expect that in a game between the Ducks and the Kings. There's always some kind of animosity that's going to occur, but yeah, I mean, that was crazy. 3 fights in 4 seconds, and all being separate fights too, was crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and some of them you could kind of expect. I mean, you all remember McDermott took out Kasha before, which we'll talk about that in relation to Cogliano and all that other kind of stuff too. But you kind of could see that one coming. Obviously, VX and Androv, they went out at it before again. And then, of course, Clifford hates the Ducks, so it wasn't a big surprise that Richie tangled with him. So, I mean, the beginning was crazy. For those of you that went to the watch party, we were going nuts. We had pretty much standing room only about an hour before the game. It was crazy, because this game was such a late start, too, as well. I mean, they honored Bob Miller before the game, and then it just dragged on and on and on. I think that, the puck drop was supposed to originally be at 7:30, and then it didn't happen until almost 8 o'clock. Pacific time. So that got a little annoying. I mean, it's great that they honored Bob Miller and everything, but I mean, like, let's go here, people, So This was a crazy game. I mean, I thought the Ducks played extremely well. They took it to the Kings, and they brought up Kasha back too as well. He had gone down to San Diego during the break, and I thought overall this was probably one of the best games that the Ducks played. Especially giving against their rival who they'd lost to twice before. Past regulation, but the Ducks hadn't beaten them in two contests before.
Yeah, and it was a good way to come back after the bye week, and I think it was arguably one of the best games for Andre Kasha of the season. I mean, he's been great in general. If you dive into the numbers, but he's actually the Ducks' second most productive forward, only behind Ryan Getzlaf. If you adjust for the ice time difference between the two forwards, I mean, he's been more productive than Rakell when he's been on the ice. So for him to come out and be obviously the number one star of this game and the Anaheim Ducks' best player, I mean, it's great getting production from a guy that, for one, I mean, he was drafted in the seventh round. When the Ducks initially drafted him in 2014, and for him to come up and even make the team, and let alone be the second most productive forward on the season, it speaks testaments to the Ducks' drafting ability and the work that Kasha has put in. And I mean, anytime he's in the lineup, he's making a difference, and I think it's easy for everybody to notice. He's a fast skater, he's quick on the forecheck, and he's always making plays. So for him to be in the lineup is crucial for the Ducks.
Absolutely. Like you said, I mean, he did a phenomenal job in this game, one of the reasons why the Ducks won. And when this game ended, a whole bunch of stuff happened in between this game and the game against Colorado. So it was a busy weekend if you were following the Ducks. There was all kinds of stuff going on Sunday and Monday. So after this, the Tampa Bay Lightning had placed JT Brown on waivers, and the Ducks ended up picking up Brown. And then they sent Shaw on waivers to make room for Brown, and then Shaw gets picked up by Montreal. So kind of a weird sequence, weird 48 hours here after the game of what's going on. And one of the fans asked us, Ricky asked us, what is our thoughts on the Ducks picking up Brown and then losing Shaw? And if you look at the numbers, Eddie, Shaw's got a little bit better numbers, not much. I mean, he's got 2 goals and 6 assists in 42 games. Brown had a goal and 3 assists in 24 games. He obviously got an assist in the game against Colorado, but he didn't play as many games. About 17, 16 less games than Shaw. But what is your thoughts as far as the Ducks getting Brown and Shaw? I mean, obviously he played the one game against Colorado too. You can factor that in there. But what did you think about all this craziness that unfolded between these games?
Yeah, I mean, at the time when they initially claimed Brown, we didn't know that Shaw was going to be sent down. So I actually liked the move because I thought it would be another depth forward. The Ducks would have some more options on wing, and Shaw would still be a part of the team. He hasn't been great this season, Logan Shaw has, but he's a productive fourth liner, and he adds to the depth of this team. And bringing in JT Brown, you kind of bring in a like-for-like guy who can fill the same role if you need just a plug and play a different player in. But then they end up putting Logan Shaw on waivers, and he ends up getting claimed, surprisingly, by the Montreal Canadiens, who just can't get enough fourth liners, it seems like, this season. So he's gone, and now it just seems a little bit weird. I mean, in all honesty, I thought they would have sent Jared Bull back down, and then he would have gone down to San Diego and would have still had Shaw and Brown. But yeah, it's an interesting one. It's not headlining acquisition, losing Shaw and getting Brown. You're essentially getting the exact same type of production. Neither of these guys are that much better than the other. We might give a slight edge to JT Brown and what he can bring, but I mean, I don't love it. I don't hate it. They're very similar players, so it's hard to sit here and say the Ducks got worse or they got better. I think if they had have kept Logan Shaw and been able to have both of them in the lineup, again, speaking to having more depth at wing, that would have been something they could have benefited from.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think when it first happened, we were all pretty, happy when, you and I and the rest of the staff were talking about it. We all know Phil was super happy because if you don't know Phil on our staff, he likes Tampa Bay and he likes the Ducks. So he was not happy that he got picked up, from Tampa Bay, but the fact he went to Anaheim, he liked that. So initially we were happy with it, and then of course the next morning we find out that Shaw's gone. So it was kind of like, okay, well, you gained one, but you took a risk and lost the other. So I kind of call it a wash. I agree with you. I do give a little bit of an edge to Brown because he hasn't played as many games. And it seemed like Carlisle wanted to give him a chance because, as you all know, Cogliano got suspended for 2 games, prior to going into Colorado. Eddie and I are going to go into a lot of depth on it later on because there's a lot of fan questions. Of course, there's a lot of you out there that are upset, and you should be. And Eddie and I will go into that because there's just a lot going on there. But we'll get to the Colorado game first and a couple other things. So they get Brown. They put him in Cogliano's spot on line number 2, obviously with Kessler and Silverberg, which I thought was kind of interesting. And I originally thought maybe he would go on line 3 or line 4, but he goes in there. The Ducks go in. They face Colorado. We know Colorado's a fast team, and unfortunately the Ducks lose this game. They took too many penalties in this game. There was a couple turning points too. It looked like after Colorado had gotten the lead, it looked like Kessler was going to maybe tie the game, and that former goalie you love, Bernier, made a paddle save on Kessler, and then Colorado turns around and scores right after that. They also got a late power play goal in the second period to go up 3-1, and the Ducks just they just didn't have an answer. I mean, they didn't play terrible in this game, Eddie, but definitely taking too many penalties, and a couple of those momentum switches in the game ultimately did the Ducks in.
Yeah, and one thing you had talked about previously before the game was how are the Ducks going to deal with the speed of this Colorado Avalanche team, and pretty much nobody has been able to deal with it over the past 6 games leading up to this one. Obviously now with the Avalanche winning this game, they've won 7 in a row, and the main reason behind that is Nathan MacKinnon has been one of the best players in the NHL this season. He's sitting tied for second in league scoring going into tonight's games, and yeah, I mean he was a difference maker in this game. He ended up getting the game-winning goal. The Ducks just really couldn't deal with it. I mean, they ended up taking 6 penalties, which hurt them, and a lot of that had to deal with the fact they just couldn't keep up with this team. There was a play, I can't remember the Colorado forward who had the breakaway, but Silverberg ends up taking a hook on him, and it gets a penalty, and that was kind of the story of this game. Wagner was able to grind out and get a goal, and unfortunately, like you said, Bernier made that great save, which could have been a turning point for the Ducks, and it goes right back. And Nathan MacKinnon scores, and the Avalanche are up 2-0. But yeah, it's just a bit disappointing. I don't think they played great in this game. I think Bernier really did help the Avalanche a lot, but by no means did the Ducks deserve to win this game. But speaking about Brown and being plugged in on the second line, and that was a little bit surprising. I think you have to look at now the fact that they actually have some chemistry on some other lines, and that was something we talked about on the last few podcasts. Now that they've got Richie, Henrique, and Kasha seem to be working together on a line, they obviously did really well in the game against the Kings, and they did pretty well in this game as well. And hopefully that becomes a line that the Ducks can rely on for some secondary scoring, along with Kessler, Silverberg, and Cogliano when they come back, and then whoever they decide to put beside Rakell and Getzlaf, which seems to be Corey Perry right now. So it looks like they're finally getting 3 lines that they can rely on, and obviously didn't work out in this game, but that's something they're going to have to continue doing moving forward.
And you mentioned Richie too in there, and it's kind of interesting because we've talked about trades and whatnot, and Phil asked some questions about trades coming up now. Obviously the Ducks getting Brown and Shaw getting picked up by Montreal, and we had talked about Richie and how he hadn't been performing as well. What do you think, obviously seeing him now with Henrique and Kasha and stuff, do you think that Richie still may be someone that the Ducks may go trade to some other team, or do you think that the Ducks maybe look more towards, like we talked about, prospects as far as like Larson or something like that, if the Ducks do in fact make a trade, come this trade deadline?
Yeah, I don't think they're ready to give up on Richie, and we talked about that before. And to be honest, I don't think I'm ready to give up on him. I think he still has that upside. I think he's maybe a late bloomer, especially with the play style that he has. So I think there's still potential for him to get better. And I think from what I've seen the last 2 games that he's been put on a line with Henrique and Cash, I think his play has gotten better. The offense still hasn't been there, but I liked what I've seen from that line so far. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. I still don't think they involve him in a deal. Earlier today, I had put out that Vander Kane, the price on him has gone up. That was reported today. Now Buffalo's looking for an insane amount for a guy who's going to be an unrestricted free agent in the offseason. So I think if the Ducks were ever in on him, they're probably out now. And an interesting thing too is Anthony Duclair is now off the market, and that was something we talked about, maybe a 1-for-1 with Richie and Duclair. Now he's off to Chicago, so that deal kind of goes out the window. And really, you still have the big name guys like Pacioretty and Hoffman who are left available. Somebody had mentioned to me Brock Nelson's name. I'm not sure if the Islanders would be willing to move him or not. And I think another interesting one coming from the same organization is Joshua Ho-Sang. And we're kind of seeing a similar thing that we saw with Jonathan Drouin when he was with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Some attitude issues. A guy who believes he should be playing in the NHL. The actual coach for the minor league affiliate for the Islanders was calling him a baby and saying he needs to grow up. So it's an interesting situation developing there, and I don't really know how much longer these two can go at it before they just need to separate ways. And don't get me wrong, Joshua Ho-Sang is a great player. And when he's been up with the Islanders this season, he's been very productive. So, there's another avenue the Ducks could explore if they're looking in to bring a young forward who can contribute to their top 9 scoring. And he's only 21, has plenty of upside. And I think he's been unfairly judged as having a bad attitude. I think, he could do from a fresh start if the Islanders are looking to move him. And I think that would be a great choice if the Ducks went and looked in that avenue.
Yeah, I agree with you on all counts. I think the price on Evander Kane has just gone stupidly high. I think the Ducks should stay away and just go with the other choices that you mentioned. I mean, if they're going to do something, they're kind of in a weird situation now. Obviously they got Brown, they lost Shaw. It's kind of up in there. We talked about it on the last show, if you didn't listen, that we thought the Ducks should try to get another forward. They kind of did this last time, but not really. So we still hold that opinion. We also think that the Ducks should also try to add on defense if they can, because as you talked about, and we really saw this in the Colorado game, the Ducks are a little bit slow there, especially on the third D-line pairing. So those are some things to look at, as the trade deadline gets a little bit closer. I mean, we're in January now. February is right around the corner. So another thing, just shifting a little bit of gears here, but amongst all the stuff that gone on in the last week, Eddie, with the Ducks, the All-Star game players were named, and Rickard Rakell made that list. So very happy for him to do it. He had 15 goals, 17 assists so far in 40 games. What did you think about Rakell making it? And do you think there's some Ducks players that maybe got snuffed out of it? Because there was some conversation, too, about how, the Kings and Vegas had, several players, but the Ducks only had one. What are your thoughts as far as the All-Star selections?
Yeah, every year, no matter what the team, there always seems to be some guys who were snubbed and didn't make the team when they should have. And that was like that across the league. There was guys that people believe should have made it. But, starting with Rakell, I think, he deserves it. He's been the Ducks' best player since the beginning of the season. I don't think Getzlaf's played enough games for him to be considered eligible for the All-Star game. But yeah, I think you look at James Neal as a guy who probably, maybe not, he didn't deserve to be there, but you look at a guy like William Karlsson and Jonathan Marchessault from Vegas, who I think equally deserve to be there, if not deserve to be there a little more than James Neal. And then the unique one comes in goal. Jonathan Quick, for sure. He's been great for the Kings this year. He's probably been the best goalie in the Pacific Division since the beginning of the season. But then you get Marc-Andre Fleury, who has only played 13 games this season. And he's been great in those 13 games, but he gets called to the All-Star game. And I think that's a little bit weird because we've seen in the past, whether it be with the All-Star game, whether it even be with awards at the end of the season, guys who have played less games usually have less of a chance of making a team or earning an award. And I think it was surprising to see his name there. Obviously, a lot of us would have liked to see John Gibson there, and I think he deserved it. Another guy as well as Mike Smith with Calgary. He's started almost all their games this season, and he's the reason that they're on a 7-game winning streak right now. He's another guy that we could have seen in that slot as well. So I think the two biggest snuffs came there, in either Gibson or Mike Smith being that second goaltender. I think it was surprising for a lot of people to see Fleury there, and I think they went with the numbers that he had. But the small sample size of games is what gets me. If he can get in there with only playing 13 games, how do you not consider a guy like Ryan Getzlaf, who had only played a handful of games at the point, and maybe him going there? Because he's been great since he's come back. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just a little bit weird for me.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I don't know, maybe if they're considering the fact that Vegas is doing so well and whatnot, especially obviously in the Pacific Division, leading the way. But I agree with you. I mean, you have Gibson that's played 34 games. You have Fleury that's played 13. I don't know. That kind of irritated me. I don't really like that. I think a lot of the people agreed. They thought, Gibson would have been one that was in there. Yeah, Gibson doesn't have a great record, but you got to look at all the games and all the things he's done to keep this Ducks team together, especially in the first couple of months with all the 50 billion injuries that this team has had. So I was a little upset about that. I was happy about Rakell, but not happy that Fleury made it over Gibson or even Mike Smith, like you said. He's another one that I thought maybe the league would go with, but that's what the results ended up being. So the big topic of the show, of course, Eddie, is the suspension of Andrew Cogliano. And there's all kinds of stuff we could talk about. There's all kinds of fan questions and all kinds of angles on this. So as we talked about the Kings game earlier in the show, a lot of physicality. 3 fights, at least individual fights right in the beginning. There was also kind of a group fight after that, but you had all that going on. You had Doughty elbowing Rakell. You had Pearson elbowing Henrique. And then you had this whole incident with Cogliano and then Kempe. For those of you that don't remember, Cogliano did get a 2-minute interference penalty in this game. And then we got word that there was going to be a hearing. And I know, Eddie, you and I, our first reaction was like, WTF, why is there going to be a hearing? I mean, it didn't look that bad of a play. And obviously some of those other plays that we saw that the Kings and Ducks were engaged in didn't get reviewed at all, which is, BS in our opinion. But what were your thoughts? We thought maybe he was going to get fined. We didn't disagree with the initial call on the penalty, but what was your initial reaction? Because we were kind of waiting for the hearing to come out. You and I had talked about it. Everyone else on the staff talked about it. We thought, okay, he's just going to get fined, no big deal. And then it comes out with the 2-game suspension.
Yeah, I think like everybody, and we've seen the reaction, I think a lot of it was just surprise. I didn't expect him to get suspended. I think with obviously him having a hearing, I expected some kind of discipline, and it would most likely be a fine, and that would be it. And we haven't seen any kind of history of play like this from Cogliano in the past, and we've seen hits that we'll get into, obviously, even after Cogliano's suspension that should have deserved a suspension and didn't get any discipline, hits in that game that people question as being just as bad, if not worse, that didn't get any response from the Department of Player Safety either. So I think the thing that frustrates me the most is the inconsistency, and I think that frustrates everybody, is the inconsistency of the Department of Player Safety and their handling of discipline. In some cases, it's just ridiculous. And it's been like that for a while. No matter, not just, you can't just criticize George Peros. It happened when Shanahan was there. It's happened all the way up until now. I mean, there's just been issues with consistency on discipline for the last, as long as I can remember, to be honest. And it's disappointing. They have to set some kind of guidelines. And I get it's subjective and it comes down to a final decision, but there has to be some guidelines to what is constituted as a dirty hit that deserves a suspension, one that deserves a fine. And then you have to take into account player history as well. Obviously, I don't think, some people were saying, well, just give it to him. Don't suspend him because of his streak. And I don't think you can take that into consideration. It's not fair to say that, oh, well, he's on an 830-game streak. Let's just let it pass, and he doesn't get a suspension. But, you have to take into account their history. It's not like he's ever done this before. And it just comes down to consistency of calls. If this was a dirty hit and it fell within their guidelines and he gets suspended, then fine. Then fine. It's a suspendable hit. But then you look at Giordano in the Calgary versus Carolina game not long after. I think it was either the night after or 2 games after the Kings game. Giordano has a headshot on Aho. Also he hits him with a little bit of a knee-on-knee on the same hit. Aho is out with a concussion. Giordano gets a match penalty, so they recognize the fact that it was a headshot. And then there's no supplementary discipline after that. He doesn't get anything else, and he's back playing for Calgary in their next game. I just that's what gets me mad about this in general. Like I agree with Cogliano. It was a late hit. there was a little bit of contact with the head, fine. But how do you call that a 2-game suspension and then let a hit like that Giordano had on Aho go the next, a day later? It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And you, the fans, out there too. In the game before, McDermott took out Kasha. Same thing. He got a major penalty in that game, got booted out, and then no supplementary discipline. So, to me, you know what? Screw all this. From now on, if there's some kind of match penalty or game misconduct or any kind of thing attached to some, a 5-minute major, whatever, to me, they should just review that play automatically. The player safety should just go back and look at it automatically, because this is a joke, period. I'm so tired of this. And I do agree with you on the point that we were talking about as far as the streak. I don't think you can look at a play, and trust me, I love Andrew Cogliano. I love the Ducks. But trying to be objective here, you can't look at the play and say do or do not suspend him because of the streak, solely because of that. Is it something that you would consider as a factor or something you would think about? Absolutely. But to solely say, okay, we're gonna do this or not do this because of that, that's not really fair. You can't do. It's difficult, I know, but you can't consider that the sole reason for a suspension or not. Now, looking at the play, go back and watch that play and freeze it by frame by frame. I must have watched it probably 20 times in a row. You watch that play. Is it an interference penalty? Absolutely. Is it something that maybe he gets fined for because he hit him in the head? And you and I talked about this. Absolutely. Is it something that he should get suspended for? Hell no. There's no way that he should be suspended. If you watch that play, he goes in to make the hit. He's tucked down. Is it a late hit? Yes. But you see Kempe try to get out of the way. When he tries to get out of the way, his stick hits Cogliano's shoulder and then hits himself in the nose. Watch the play. Go back, freeze it frame by frame. There is no way that he should be suspended on this play. And I like you said, it wasn't just Peros, and I know he got a lot of heat from a lot of people, and it's still out there. He's getting a lot of heat. It's also the Shanahan thing too. But they need to start changing these rules and fix some stuff up. I mean, like I said, they should talk about these 5-minute majors. They should all be reviewed. Any play that has head contact, it should be reviewed, because the part of this that upset me the most too, Eddie, and this is where a lot of the fans do have a valid point, is you saw what Drew Doughty did. You saw what Pearson did. Both those were blatant elbows, and they did not get reviewed at all. If they would have been both reviewed and got fines or suspensions or whatever, I think that would have made the situation a little better. But the fact that they didn't even look at either one of those plays, and those are totally obvious, blatant plays. I don't care what anybody says. You go back and watch those plays. And one of them, the one with Pearson and Henrique, the ref is standing right there and sees it and does nothing. It just irritates me. I don't like to complain about calls. That's not the way you and I are. We talk about games and stuff. But if we're going to be concerned about headshots and things that happen to players, it goes both ways. You've got to look at every single headshot in every game now. I think that's the only way you're going to make this fair and consistent, because they've been consistent at being inconsistent, Eddie.
Yeah, and I think a problem too is we don't really even know where it stands and how to judge a play like this, because there's so much inconsistency in the calls. I mean, who are any of us to say that this is a suspendable play or not? Because we don't have a standard to compare it to. I keep referring to this hit and the hits in the game because they're recent. Obviously the Doughty elbow on Rakell and the Giordano hit on Aho. To me, the Giordano hit for sure is suspendable. I believe the Doughty elbow on Rakell deserves a look at, whether it's a fine or suspension.
Exactly.
No, I think it's borderline, but when similar plays and occur within such a short time, and then Cogliano is the one who ends up getting the suspension, and obviously it's hard to not be a little bit biased and feel bad for Cogliano. But it's just, we can't really sit here and judge because there's no consistent standard to judge it against. And that's something the NHL and the Department of Player Safety have to work on. There has to be a standard of what's considered a suspendable hit and what's considered a hit that just needs a fine, and what's considered a hit that the player can get off with just a match penalty and no further discipline after that. And we're not at that point right now, and I don't know how we're not at that point this far down the road, how they're not anywhere close to that. Like, it's just ridiculous. And we've been dealing with this for I don't know how long. It seems every season there seems to be an issue with the consistency of suspensions by the Department of Player Safety, and nobody really knows what they look at, and they put out the videos and they try and explain it, but it never gets any clearer. And that's just the main issue right now. And it seems simple. Sit down, figure out some guidelines on what's a dangerous hit and what's not, find out what you consider a suspendable hit and what you don't, and go from there and work on some consistency. But it's just ridiculous, especially when, yes, we talked about we believe Cogliano's hit is late. Yes, there's contact with the head. If you consider that a suspendable hit at the Department of Player Safety, fine. Then it's a suspendable hit and he gets suspended for 2 games no matter what of his previous history or whatever. But then you see a similar hit a day later and nothing happens other than a match penalty. That's where I think a lot of people are confused, and there's really nothing, there's no way to look at it any other way because there's no standard to compare it to. And I honestly don't know when it's going to get fixed because I talked about it and you talked about it, how it's not just Peros, it's Shanahan, it's other guys who have been in charge where this has still been an issue. And I get it, the plays are subjective and it comes down to a final decision, but you would expect there to be at least some consistency. And we've seen the same issue with goaltender interference, and at least that's got a little bit better. But, yeah, I mean, when it comes down to taking a player out for 2 games, and obviously it's disappointing the way it happened to Cogliano and with his streak, but you've got to have some consistency if you're going to take players out of a lineup.
The only thing I can really compare it to in another sport, and I mean, this isn't even, they got their own issues too, but if you look at the NFL, they look at all the scoring plays. They review them every single time. Okay, that's what they do. And I know there's some other issues with the catch and all that completion stuff. That's BS. But my point is, they look at every single scoring play and it's reviewed. So guess what? Every single major penalty and every single headshot should be reviewed. And I think that's the only way you're going to at least get consistent with these couple issues. If it's automatically reviewed by the player safety, like you said, the Doughty hit, the Pierce hit, maybe they're not suspensions. Maybe they're fines instead. Okay, but at least those plays are going to get reviewed. And I think that's what so many people are upset about, is that it's not just that they reviewed the Cogliano play, which you and I thought shouldn't even have been reviewed, at least based upon what we know. And like you said, the standard is so blurry, it's ridiculous. But that play gets reviewed, he gets suspended. They don't go review the other 2 hits in the same game that, in my mind, were far worse and far more intentional. I just blows my mind, and I think that's the problem. I hate to take a black and white approach, but if we're going to be concerned about players and their health, if that's the main thing that we're talking about, the longevity of them playing in the game, like they've taken away, on the icing. When you remember back in the day, they used to crash into the boards all the time, and now of course they blow the whistle at that certain point, and they've stopped that. Well, if they're going to stop this stuff too, there is no gray. They're just going to have to decide, okay, every time there's head contact, every time there's a major penalty, forget it. It's going to be reviewed. And that's the way that stuff's going to be stopped. But the other factor, too, that I think was disappointing, I think the bigger one in this, Eddie, I mean, the streak is important, of course, but I think the biggest thing is he has no history, 0 history. And he didn't even extend really on the hit. I mean, that's what blows my mind. I remember you and I talked about this. We thought, okay, he's probably going to get fined, no big deal. And then when it came out, we were just like, are you effing kidding me? I just think that's it. And if that's not the standard, if it's not that they're going to say, okay, we're automatically looking at these plays or something, okay, whatever. They need to come up with something, because like you said, it's all over the place. You'll watch the videos and they'll tell you that this is interference, or they'll tell you that this is cross-checking, or this is, whatever. But it's just unfortunate because it's like they pick and choose sometimes. There's no rhyme or reason. And that's just the way it's been. And I know some people, we had some fan questions. They're like, well, why did they get it and why didn't we get it? I mean, I don't really have a reason. And I think that's the bigger issue, is not just that he got suspended and his streak is gone, but there are no clear guidelines. And a lot of people, I saw on Twitter and Facebook just royally upset and righteously upset. They just don't have a system in place that is consistent. And until that happens, unfortunately, these things are going to happen, whether you're a Ducks fan, a Kings fan, Sharks fan, whoever you root for. We're going to keep on seeing this, and it's just not going to get fixed, Eddie.
Yeah, and you talked about his history and the fact that he's never really been involved in anything like this before. And he skated to the penalty box, accepted his penalty, didn't argue, didn't hear from him about it after the game. He said that he wasn't trying to injure Kempe. Kempe didn't even get injured on the play too, which I think is significant. The fact that he wasn't injured, he came back, he finished the game, he played the entire game, and I just don't get it. It's disappointing, and I restate, like, I agree it was a late hit, and he did hit him in the head. But when you take into account, they always say they take into account player history, the fact if the guy got injured or not, and both of those, Cogliano has a clean record and Kempe is fine.
Yeah.
He still gets a 2-game suspension. And again, I'm going to refer to, everybody's probably sick of it, I'm going to refer to the Giordano hit again. Giordano has a history of these types of hits. Aho gets hurt, he has a concussion, he has a lower body injury, we don't know how long he's out for. Giordano gets a penalty, and then no discipline after that. They're similar plays. The Giordano hit actually injured the player. Giordano has a history of these types of hits, and he gets away without a suspension. That's the thing I think that pisses a lot of people off is again, there's no standard, there's no guidelines. A hit that by a guy who has no history and accepts the fact that it wasn't a clean hit, and the player doesn't get injured, gets a suspension, when the guy who has a history and injures the player doesn't. And I don't see how they get away with that, to be honest.
Yeah, and I mean, you speak about this whole thing, and of course we talk about the fan reaction, but guess what? Players chimed in on this too. You saw Francois Beauchemin tweet out about it. You saw Ty Domi tweet about it. You saw a couple others. We even asked Teemu Selanne about this on Twitter, and he replied, and he said, quote, "This is a tough one. NHL having been criticized that they don't look after the players enough, especially the hits on the head. Cogs," and he quotes, "little hit is late, but he's super clean reputation for the game, and luckily Kempe doesn't get hurt. I think it's too big of a punishment for him." That's what Teemu said, pretty much what you and I are saying. And I mean, you see all these other players tweeting out this stuff, saying that they just think that it's just ridiculous. So, I mean, you know that it's gotten to the point where it's bad when the players take to social media, and even players that aren't even on the Ducks or retired players like Teemu, of course, but he's going to defend the Ducks, of course. But you've got all these people going out there and saying, basically, WTF to this whole thing. So, I mean, that this is a big issue. And I think the only way is they're going to have to set up a system, and they're going to have to come up with a way of saying, what plays are reviewed, what plays aren't, Eddie. I think the other thing is you have to look at the player history, and they need to determine how the suspensions are doled out. We've seen it, but like Rafi Torres one time got suspended for a bazillion games because of his history, and then they've got to come up with some kind of a system so that there's no surprise. Like if it's a first offense, it's 1 game or 2 games or whatever it is. They need to come up with that and come up with the criteria, because right now there really is no criteria. I mean, when you watch those videos on the player safety, all they tell you is, well, they hit his head. Okay, he committed a penalty. But then when they give you that game suspension number, it's like they just pull it out of who knows where, because it doesn't follow a pattern at all. And other hits we've seen, and it's like, oh, okay, the guy got a fine. And you're like, he got a fine for that? He didn't get a penalty? And this one, of course, the Cogliano is the reverse. We thought he was going to get only a fine. So I think that's the biggest issue here, is some kind of system has to be set up for fines, the number of hits, the player history involved, how many prior incidents they've had. Like you said, if the player's injured or not. Kempe wasn't even injured on this play. I mean, yeah, he had a little bit of blood on his nose. But like I said, go back and watch the video. His own stick hits him in the nose. Give me a break, people. It was not Cogliano hitting him that caused that. And he was trying to get out of the way. So that's really all I have, Eddie. I don't really have anything else to say on this. I mean, I know everybody else out there listening is frustrated. Cogliano had to sit that game against Colorado. He's got to sit that game against Pittsburgh. It's unfortunate because the streak ends and it's not by his choice, which I think is complete BS. But that's the way the rules are set because he's still missing the game technically. But I just think there needs to be an overhaul, player safety period. Whether it's getting rid of Peros or it's changing the system, I know a lot of people are mad at Peros. I don't know if booting him out is necessarily the answer, but some kind of reform has to be done, because it's just ridiculous. And we've seen this with other teams and other players.
Yeah, and to be honest, I only think they were just trying to make an example of Cogliano to the rest of the players in the league, saying, if we can suspend a guy who is on a streak like this, and it doesn't matter to us, and we can suspend a guy who has no history, and a guy wasn't injured on the play, then we can suspend anybody. And I don't know if that's true. I hope it isn't, because That's not something you should be doing. You should treat every play equally. But to me, that seems like a possibility in what they were trying to do. But then you go into the next night and you get a hit from a player who has a history, and then they don't get suspended. And then you say, well, if they're trying to make an example of Cogliano, they didn't really follow up with it on a play after that. And I guess we'll have to see how they deal with discipline throughout the rest of the season and see if that ends up being the case. But it just sucks. I mean, everything was going well for Cogliano up to that point. He was having a great season. Obviously, again, the streak was continued. He just signed a contract extension with the Ducks for 3 more seasons. And then he goes out, and we all saw the interview that he had with Ken French and was on the verge of tears because, he rarely talks about, during the streak, he rarely talked about it because, it wasn't important to him at the time. It was just a thing that was happening. He was still playing, and now he's reflecting on it, and it's an amazing achievement from a guy to come into the league and never miss a game. A lot of people look at that and are impressed with that, and they should be. I mean, that's amazing for a guy in the way he plays too, and how hard he plays, to never miss a game by injury. Cassie was out with the flu. It was all this season, and to never miss a game with injury, illness, anything up until that point is amazing, and it's just disappointing that it ends with the suspension.
I mean, yeah, absolutely, and it's unfortunate too. We've seen several times where Cogliano's taken a beating too. A couple of those games against Chicago, we've seen where he's gotten his teeth knocked out, and he still goes to the locker room for 5 seconds and runs back out. I mean, it's just crazy to see what he's done, and I guess one of the points that comes up from one of our buddies over at Refu Suck is he says, what's the sign idea is going to be for Cogliano when he comes back on Friday? Obviously the Ducks are going to play Pittsburgh on Wednesday. He'll be out that game. Then they play the Kings, and he was saying, put 831 up there as the number. And, I don't know. I mean, for us, it's free Iron Man. That's what ours is, because, it's just frustrating. I still think the streak should continue. I know that's not, it's not how the rules are written or whatever, but I just think that the whole way that this went down was completely wrong and mishandled, and it's just frustrating, like you said, especially a guy like Cogliano. He's not an arrogant type of person. He's not one to go out there and be like, look at me, look what I'm doing. He's been reserved. He's been a professional. He's taken a beating from all kinds of different games and keeps on ticking. And for this to be the way, it's just man, I just have to shake my head. I don't have anything else to say. I mean, like you said, watching that video of Cogliano made me want to cry. I mean, I felt bad for the guy because knowing his reputation, knowing his demeanor, the respect that he has around the league, and the players coming to bat for him on social media, it's just frustrating. And so with that, the Ducks are going to have to battle out Pittsburgh this week, Eddie. Who they did beat. They took them out 4-0 before, so hopefully the Ducks can beat them. And then of course they're going to play LA again, which this is going to be interesting because now Cogliano's coming back, and he's coming back in the game against the Kings that he got suspended for. So this is going to be a wild affair, as they always are. They're always physical. Who knows how many fights will be in this game? And then of course the Ducks follow that up against San Jose, another team that we know that the Ducks love as well. So this is going to be a crazy week, Eddie, with these 3 games coming up, and I expect there to be a lot of fireworks in these 3 contests.
Yeah, and I think this Pittsburgh game is going to be a little bit different from when we played them throughout this season. They're actually starting to play like the team a lot of people expected them to play as. Obviously, Matt Murray is still out of the lineup. I don't know if he'll be ready to go by the time Pittsburgh and the Ducks play tomorrow, but it'll be interesting. The Penguins play us on Wednesday, and then they play the Kings on Thursday, so we'll see. We'll either see Tristan Jarry or whoever else they decide to put out there if Matt Murray isn't ready. And this is a team who's won 5 of their last 6 games, and in all the wins that they've had, they've scored at least 4, 5, or 6 goals. So they're starting to play very well. Kessel, obviously, Crosby, Malkin are playing up to the level they expect. So this is going to be a tough game for the Ducks. And then again, you go into Friday's game against the Kings, and like you said, Cogliano returns against the team where he ended up getting the suspension. So it's going to be an emotional game. I'm sure we'll see a couple more fights. I'm sure Jared Bowl will be dressed for that game in the lineup. So that's going to be a feisty one. And again, it's a game that's important to the Ducks. It was important that they won the last one against the Kings in regulation, and we talked about this on the last podcast as well, that these games are becoming more important at this point in the season. The Ducks are going to have to win these games, and if they can, win them in regulation to gain points on the teams in front of them. And that's the same thing for the Sharks game on Sunday as well. The Sharks have been struggling lately. They're still in a good position, however, so the Ducks are going to have to go into that game as well and try and get 2 points in regulation. So this is a tough week, and it's against 3 good teams and 2 very important Pacific Division rivals. So, if they can come out of these and win at least the 2 games against LA and San Jose, that's going to be huge for their push into the playoffs.
Yeah, because, if you look at the standings right now, San Jose is in action as we're recording this podcast, so it can change. But if you look, San Jose is 3 points ahead of the Ducks, and the Kings are 4 points, and the Ducks are in 5th place. So you've got them all log-jammed there, battling it out. And Calgary, who you mentioned, has been on a roll. They've won 7 in a row. They're 1 point above LA at this point of the show when we're recording it, as I mentioned. So you've got those 4 teams battling it out for 2nd and 3rd and maybe a wild card spot. So I still hold on to the belief that the Ducks will make the playoffs, but I think it's going to be a wild finish in the West, in the Pacific Division especially. And we'll have to see how it turns out. But I still think the Ducks are on the upswing. Yeah, they didn't play as well as we thought in Colorado, but I expect them to come out and play pretty well in these next 3 games. I really expect them to be fired up on Friday against LA when Cogliano comes back, and the Ducks are playing at home in Honda Center. So I look for them to keep it going the next 3 games. We'll probably do a podcast after those 3. And we're going to probably have a watch party sometime in February. We'll see, maybe March. We'll figure it out. But we had a lot of fun at the last one. Everybody showed up and it was packed well before the game. So a lot of fun times. So with that, we will be back in a week. Let's go Ducks and free Iron Man.